Hello.
Yes, sir. Dr. Satish, we can hear you.
Hello. Yes.
Yes, sir. Dr. Satish, we can hear you.
So my voice is clear.
Sir,
So my voice is clear.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah. So
hello, sir.
yeah, I'm trying to share my presentation. I'm just trying. Trying to share my presentation. I'm just trying.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not able to get this. Not able to get this. So how do you share now? I mean,
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, 1 second. I'll just make you the co-host. Sir, yes, sir. Sir, 1 second. I'll just make you the co-host. Sir, make you the co-host.
okay. So
Sir, make you the co-host.
how do we share?
Yes, we can see it, sir. We can see your presentation, sir.
You're able to see?
Yes, absolutely.
Clear.
You're able to see?
Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely.
Very good. So what will I do now?
Full screen, sir.
Full screen, sir.
So what will I do now?
Full screen, sir.
Yeah, absolutely visible,
Done.
sir.
Done.
Yeah, then I will just see. You able to see? I will just see. Okay. So slides are moving.
Absolutely moving, sir.
Yeah, good. So
Hello, Raja.
Absolutely moving. Yeah, KC Mittal, sir. Good
मास्क
afternoon,
लगाना
sir.
पड़ेगा क्या? वो तो public है.
KC Mittal, sir.
Hello.
Very good afternoon, sir.
Sir, बहुत ज्यादा echo हो रहा है.
so good. Thank you so much for helping me out.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So when I again say share, it will share. I will again one.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, shared. Are you able to see now?
Yes, sir. Can we see? We can see, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Then I will now stop and I'll
Yes, sir.
good. So I can keep logged in. My video is clear.
यार मैं ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲਿੰਕ ਭੇਜੋ ਦੀ ਈਮੇਲ ਆਈਡੀ
ਬੜੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਭੇਜਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਰ, ਮੈਂ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਭੇਜ ਦੇਣਾ। Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you for joining. We welcome all the delegates. Welcome to this one and all. Welcome to this important webinar, online webinar hosted by the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, on the topic Built Environment and Public Health, the rediscovery of light and ventilation. First, I'm going to talk about the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi is a premier institute which consistently ranks in the top 5 NIRF rankings in architecture and planning. It is an institute of national importance created by an act of parliament. It was established in 1941 and this is currently under the Ministry of Education, Government of India. And we have major national and international architects and planners who are alumni of School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. We also want to take this opportunity to thank ISAC, India's leading not-for-profit and cybersecurity built environment and professional ethics NGO, for kindly providing us the WebEx platform for this webinar. To start with, I would request our director, Dr. PSN Rao. But before I request him to start, I would like to introduce Dr. PSN Rao. Dr. PSN Rao is the director of School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, which is equivalent to the post of Vice Chancellor of a university. We are privileged to have him as a person who is an architect, engineer, and town planner, an AIIA, FITP, and a FIE. He has over 34 plus years of experience. He was the former chairperson of DUAC for 6 years and 7 months, and he's currently also the professor of housing at School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He has written in multiple journals, multiple news outlets, and he's the voice of housing and important matters, especially with respect to smart cities and urban development in India. We welcome Dr. PSN Rao.
Thank you, Professor Raja Singh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome all of you for this webinar being conducted by the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Respected Honorable Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyalji, Chairperson of the National Green Tribunal, Professor Yugo Lee, Chair Professor from the Hong Kong University, Architect Premendra Raj Mehta ji, several other learned speakers who have assembled here this afternoon, fellow faculty members at SPA, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to welcome all of you to this very important and topical subject of built environment and public health, the rediscovery of light and ventilation. Why are we using this term rediscovery? I would like to spend a minute on this because fundamentally architecture is about built spaces and how we articulate light and ventilation within the built spaces is very integral. Light and ventilation is very integral to the way in which we build. But somehow over a period of time, what has happened is that with the advent of modern day technology, there are many new equipments which have got created, and on account of that, we've been creating artificial environments. If you go back maybe 100 years ago, you would find most of the buildings that were built at that point in time, they hardly had any technological devices, except perhaps for a bulb or a fan. So the interior environments required to look at natural light and natural ventilation, and for that we had the provisions made in the built form in such a manner that when we want light, when we want light to come into the buildings, then we would articulate our built form in such a manner, and when we want to have shade, then we would appropriately design our buildings in that kind of a manner. So therefore, we had ventilators, we had high roofs to keep the interiors cool. For the warm air to go out, we had ventilators. We had deep verandas to keep the outer walls shaded. We also had internal courts or courtyards. So the built form was designed in such a manner that the natural light and ventilation was taken care of. Bring in just the amount of light that you need so that you can be comfortable inside. But fortunately or unfortunately, technology has advanced. Air conditioning came into the picture. We now have modern day air conditioners, and to cool large areas, large volumes would become more expensive. So slowly the building height started reducing. We started putting false ceilings and so on and so forth. The courtyards disappeared because land became more expensive, and we did away with verandas because that would just be a waste of space. In our urban areas, built space is very, very expensive, whether to purchase or to give it on rent. So for a wide variety of reasons, interior environments have started changing. And with that, the way we played with light and ventilation has also started changing. And on account of that, we had to redo our building codes, and whether it was a large public building, whether it was a meeting hall, whether it is a auditorium, we brought in this concept of an air change. So how many air changes per hour you would require, and so on and so forth. So we inhale oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide and all of that. The science and the engineering and the technology of light and ventilation is becoming more and more important, because there is something called the sick building syndrome, and people inside buildings feel uncomfortable. There is spread of disease. So today we are now looking at a multidisciplinary environment. We are looking at public health, we are looking at virology, we are looking at technology, we are looking at science, and we are trying to see how all of these can be seen together so that we create interior environments which are more healthy. There was a time when probably classes were held in the outside, in the open. There was also a time when we would keep all our doors and windows open, and only probably the head of the institution would be eligible for an air conditioner, and all others would just keep their doors and windows open and let in plenty of fresh air and fresh light. And that was how offices were working, that was how residences were working. But unfortunately today, you wake up in an air conditioned environment, you get into a car or a metro train which is also an air conditioned environment, you come into your office which is again an air conditioned environment. So 24/7 you are in a closed built environment. And when you are in this closed built environment, the question of the quality of air inside this is put to test, and that really affects our health. So today we have other gadgets like air purifiers and so on, which have also come supposedly to our rescue. But then what are we doing? We have moved from a point where natural resources were available and we were all living with that quite comfortably. But we've closed ourselves in, and now we are surrounding ourselves with a variety of gadgets, and more of those as we go along. So are we doing the right thing? I think that is where the question today arises. And particularly in the COVID-19 environment, this has come to a very sharp focus. So that is the reason why more research has now started in this particular area, and I think that's a good sign that we are going to now take a relook and rediscover light and ventilation in the built environment. I think it's a very, very topical area. There's a lot for architects to unlearn and relearn, and architects and biologists and virologists. All of us have to look at it together. And of course, the right to a healthy environment. The judiciary, the legal luminaries, they also have a very important role to play in all of this. So I would like to thank all the people who have been working day in and day out to put this conference together. I welcome all of you to this webinar on built environment and public health, and I am sure that the deliberations of this afternoon will enlighten all of us, will help us take a relook at the concepts that have been agreed for so long. So we may have to actually now redo certain portions of our building bylaws. We may have to redo certain portions of our national building code. We may have to also redo some portions of our teaching curriculum, the way we are shaping the future minds, the future architects of the days to come. So I think a lot of takeaways are going to be there. So I will not stay for long between you and the excellent lineup of speakers, luminaries that we have this morning with us. So thank you, Professor Anil Diwan and Professor Raja Singh. You put together a nice set of speakers, and we are all eagerly waiting to listen to all of them and to learn from them, so that we can decide on the way forward. So a very warm welcome to all of you once again, and thank you. Over to Raja Singh.
Thank you. We thank Professor Dr. P.S.N. Rao. Next up, we have our most important, chief guest for today. We have Honorable Mr. Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyal. His Lordship is the chairperson of the National Green Tribunal since July 6, 2018. He was the former judge of Supreme Court, former Chief Justice of Odisha High Court, and former Chief Justice of Guwahati High Court. He was the acting Chief Justice and Judge at the Punjab and Haryana High Court at Chandigarh. He has practiced for more than 27 years on the other side in the bar in Punjab and Haryana High Court, Delhi High Court, and Supreme Court. On a personal note, he's very close to the environment, and he's often seen, in the morning in Lodi Gardens, and he's very close to the environment. So we welcome Justice Mr. Adarsh Kumar Goyal. Please, sir. Very close to the environment. So we welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. Professor Rao, Director SPA, Dr. Lee, Chair, Professor, Hong Kong University, Architect Parminder Raj Mehta, Ex-President, Council of Architecture, Architect Deependra Prasad, my friend, Shri K.C. Mittal, Ex-Bar Council of Delhi Chairman, Dr. Kapilya Var, Miss Rithima Kaul, Miss Mohan Basu, Dr. Anil Diwan, Architect Raja Singh, and all the dignitaries and participants of this program organized by the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, on the subject of built environment and public health, rediscovery of light and ventilation. I'm so happy to see such program being organized by this prestigious institution of School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. I never thought that architects will be working on this subject, which is very important. And perhaps never before architects may have thought of considering this type of program of having a look at what are the environmental needs or environmental mandate. In fact, environment, though very, very important in our ancient Indian studies, did not receive much attention till 1972, when Stockholm Conference took place for the first time, to consider what should be done in the wake of the threats of global warming, which threatened a large section of mankind. In 1972, the Indian Prime Minister of that time pointed out that there is a serious difference in approach in India and the rest of the world. In India, we don't use the words like exploiting the nature. Like she cited her own father, who was the earlier first Prime Minister, and she referred to the conquering of Himalaya, and the then Prime Minister of India raising an objection, don't use the word conquering of Himalaya. You may have climbed Himalaya, but you can't say you have conquered Himalayas. Then we are saying exploiting the nature for the benefit. Nature should not be accepted, because our thinking is that we are not superior to the nature. We are not the master of the nature. We say in our prayer every day in the morning that Mother Earth is the mother and the man is the son. So man survives, or man is sustained, or human activities are sustained by nature, by the environment. Guru Nanak Dev said, Pavan Guru Pani Pita, means he compared air to Guru, teacher, and water to father, and earth to mother. So that has been ancient thinking. Our Prime Minister cited thousands of year old studies in Atharva Ved to explain the development of sustainable development and relationship of man and environment, where she cited a shlok, which means that you should take from the nature only that much which you can give back, so that the next generations are not affected. So these principles of intergenerational equity, precautionary principles, sustainable development principles, which have now become embodied concepts of environment law, were very much there in our Indian philosophy. We are getting the light from the sun. We are now discussing rediscovery of light and ventilation. So we are getting the light from the sun, we are getting light from the ventilation, from the air. Can there be a substitute? Can it be manufactured in a factory? And can there be a substitute to the sunlight or to the ventilation which nature provides? We have dark nights, bright days in certain parts of the world. And the government gives subsidies to people to come and live there for providing essential services or needs of the people who are born there. There will be night for months together, because there will be no sunlight, or there will be day for months together, there will be no night. We have so many planets in our solar system, and we are still trying to discover, is there a life outside the earth? So far, we have not been able to find any life outside the earth. Reason is the balance required, or environment required. It is the discovery of water first, which was found to be essential component for survival. And all the civilizations in the world grew on the banks of the rivers, or where the water was available, because without water, air was of course available, but water was not available everywhere. Therefore, the civilizations commenced wherever water was available. So it is the slogan our Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri gave was Jai Kishan and Jai Jawan. because you need for security, you need army or soldiers, and for food security or for survival, you need the farmer. And later, another slogan was added to it, that is Jai Vigyan, the science, the studies. Without science, perhaps our life can't be meaningful. But the science is a weapon which can be used as well as misused. It can be a weapon of destruction, it can be a weapon of great happiness. According to our Indian systems, mission of life is adding to the happiness. Are we making value addition to other people on the earth? That is our prayer, that to make everyone happy. Sarve bhavantu sukhina. That is our mission. And every activity, it may also be activity of the School of Planning and Architecture, is meant to be an activity which makes value addition to the happiness of the mankind. So you are undertaking a scientific study of what value addition you can make by your knowledge of architecture and planning. That's how you are having a discussion on the subject. You have a professor from Hong Kong University about awareness on airborne infections spread across the world, which is killing millions of people. Airborne diseases are killing millions of people. Perhaps we are not fully conscious, and much more consciousness is required. And I am sure this address by Professor Lee will help us on this subject. And then you have the subject of bylaws and public health from architect Mehta. There was a recent Supreme Court judgment directing demolition of the towers in a residential complex. The reason is that the distance between the two towers was required to be at least equal to half of the height of one tower. There were some other issues also, but then it was found that if you do it, anyway, some architect must have advised or ill-advised construction of such towers. So the role of architects is so important. I was thinking that we are only going by the building bylaws which are prepared by experts, and architects just follow the laid down rules if they are sincere to the job. But now I find from discussion which you are going to have that you are not merely going by the laid down rules, but you are going much far, being conscious of the air pollution or air quality to be breathed. There are most of the architects will be thinking of maximizing the utilization of the area, having maximum covered area by which the person who is making the colony or making the building can have maximum commercial advantage. But then sustainable building concept, I find from your subject, that means you are also thinking that not merely what is the commercial value of the building, but what is the environmental value of the building. You are also thinking of green building, you are thinking of sustainable building. That means you want to ensure the quality of life of the person who will ultimately occupy, not only the person who is developing a project, not only from his point of view, but also from the point of view of the person who is going to take and occupy the building. Will he get natural light? Unfortunately, in many places we go, the buildings are recklessly air conditions are installed, and recklessly air conditions are made to function. Perhaps the earlier buildings, I have visited some buildings built thousands of years ago or 500 years ago, and the architects of that time, who were not so well read as you are, they designed the building in such a way that no air conditioner is needed. Naturally air conditioned, and natural light is coming. We did not have any light, or as a student up to 8th class, I studied in the earthen land in a village. There was no light. Light came much later. Now the light has not only become a source of comfort, but also a nuisance to some extent. Too much of lighting everywhere. And you say, all right, switch off the light. because it is affecting the neurology, it's affecting the physiology of the body. And these are some of the issues which need serious consideration. We have also added against my name the role of judiciary. Yes, role of judiciary is very much there. We always wish there is no judiciary. Why judiciary is needed at all? Judiciary is needed if a dispute arises. Why a dispute should arise? But that may be an ideal situation where no dispute is arising. But we are not in an ideal state of affairs. So disputes are arising on everything. Everything is brought to the court because we are not able to resolve, or one or the other party is lacking in the righteous conduct or sincerity, which compels the aggrieved party to come to the court. Or sometimes the aggrieved party may dragging the other person to court unnecessarily. So that's how one or the other party is certainly not on the righteous path. Then what happens? It may be a dispute between citizen and citizen. It may be a dispute between citizen and state also. Under our modern constitution, the state has several obligations. And there are now, as they call, political compulsions, etc., which drive the state to take certain decisions. But then those decisions are to be tested on the touchstone of the constitution by the judiciary. Is the decision consistent with the fundamental rights? Is it within the scope of your power? Is the decision taken honestly? Is it bona fide? Have you considered relevant considerations? So these are the issues which judiciary has to take a call. In exercise of, there is a writ power with the higher courts or constitutional courts, as we call them, high courts in India, Supreme Court in India, which can enforce all statutory rights as well as constitutional rights. There are civil courts which enforce civil rights which are granted under different laws. There are various forums. You can go to the High Court, you can go to the Supreme Court. Apart from that, like I am now in Green Tribunal. So Green Tribunal has a mandate to ensure that if there is a violation of environmental norms, so whatever is required to be done for protection of environment, you can give a positive order, or you can require the violator to pay compensation, or you can issue an order to stop an activity which is not compatible with the environment, which violates the laid down laws. At times it is happening, the laws are there, but enforcement is not. That also becomes a matter being brought before the judiciary, and the judiciary can make the person who is not enforcing accountable. All right, this is your statutory duty, your constitutional duty. Why are you not doing it? And if you are not doing, do it. And if you don't do, there may be consequences. So there is a role of judiciary, but that's not the only role. The role which this School of Planning and Architecture is playing is unique and significant and important in its own way. It supplements the role of advancing environmental justice or improving the quality of life. So in Supreme Court judgments, I'm not referring to the judgments. I'm not in a limited time going to open up more issues. But then by Supreme Court judgments, it has been made compulsory to teach environment as a subject to school students. There are voluntary organizations. There are large number of movements started without any law, without any court order, voluntarily by people, because environment requires a healthy life, and which is an inherent right, which is a human right to breathe fresh air, to drink fresh water. But today, everybody on the table has a water bottle. Why? Because the sources of water are not clean or pollution free or of the requisite quality, which is not harmful. The water which you find everywhere, you can't trust it. Therefore, you go and buy a bottle of water. And if you buy a bottle of water, you generate plastic, which further adds to the pollution. We perhaps do not know. We use the water bottle and throw it. But where is the destination? Where is it going? Is it creating further toxicity in the environment on account of unsafe disposal? So much of waste is generated. We have huge mountains of waste, garbage. We don't know where to take them because it requires serious effort and the government machinery has its own limitations. So it is the School of Planning and Architecture or other educational institutions, other voluntary bodies, a common man, the problems faced are so serious unless there is a collective effort made and participation is of everyone individually as well as collectively, the problems cannot be changed. With that, I will not take your more time. And I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. If I can answer any questions, if there is a time available, I'll be happy to do that because out of allotted time, I have perhaps 10 more minutes up to 2:40. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Lordship, for enlightening us all about this important topic. And now I request everybody who's listening, if there's any question that you would like to ask. Any questions from anybody? Any student who's logged in, any question that you want to ask, you can please raise your hand or start speaking or type in the message box. Okay. So, sir, I would like to ask you a question, sir. Sir, in 1914, the post of the Sanitary Commissioner was merged with the post of DG of Indian Medical Services, which, according to K. Sujata Rao, former Secretary of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, reduced the importance of public health. So, what can we do as organizations, as public spirited citizens, to make sure that this public health again becomes important, sir?
I will first of all thank you for that question, which is of great importance. The question relates to some administrative structural change, which is a policy matter generally left to the government, but anything can be tested on the anvil of the public interest. Does it advance public interest? What is the compulsion? It can be an issue raised, and don't underestimate power of any citizen or any institution. If it has happened, and as you have pointed out that some officer of the government itself pointed out it is not proper, you can take up the issue in various ways. You can raise that issue with the concerned authorities themselves. If it becomes necessary, you can also bring in the court in the name of public interest. If it advances public interest, court can also ask them to make a change. Maybe at a given point of time, it was thought unnecessary, public health officers are not necessary. There was no awareness, and perhaps condition was not so bad. It's due to urbanization, due to modernization, due to industrialization, environmental problems have increased. And with the increased problem, you have to have a relook at all the decisions which have been taken earlier. So it's an important issue. I think you can raise it either at a judicial forum or first at the administrative forum. If it becomes necessary, also at a judicial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm sure all of us, gained a lot from sir's very important address, the keynote address, and he covered a lot of points with respect to judiciary and our everyday lives and how right to healthy environment is an essential component of our everyday lives, especially when we are in cities like New Delhi and other metropolitans in India. I would like to again, on the behalf of School of Planning and Architecture and on the behalf of my director, sir, who's present here, thank you, sir, for coming today and taking time out and addressing this audience and, sharing your most valuable thoughts with us, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
we would now go on, and our next speaker is Professor Dr. Yugo Lee. Professor Dr. Yugo Lee, I would introduce Professor Dr. Yugo Lee. He's the Chair Professor of Building Environment and the Honorary Professor of School of Public Health at the University of Hong Kong. Sir is the present, member, part of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission. He's the editor of Indoor Air, which is a very renowned global journal on the topic of indoor air quality. He was the member of the WHO appointed COVID-19 IPC Guidance Development Group. He's also in 2003, when there was an outbreak of SARS in Hong Kong, he helped the government of Hong Kong in investigating the spread of SARS 2003 in Amoy Gardens, which became a very landmark case in this matter. He also, works in the area primarily of mechanisms of transmission of airborne transmission of diseases. His work and his team's work has led to definitions of important components like short range aerosol transmission, surface touch, and city ventilation, etc. So we are really, really honored. Sir took time out, and out of his, very important places that he addresses, he took time to address our humble gathering. We are really, really thankful to Professor Dr. Yugo Lee. Sir, are you there, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Devon and Professor Rao. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so really exciting to hear the insightful speech by the Honorable Justice, and so happy to see how India is preparing to face the new challenge as we have discovered the pandemic. So I was asked to talk about how we get on to understand the importance of airborne transmission or airborne infection of SARS-CoV-2 worldwide. As we all know, last summer, August, I had a talk in one of the Indian conferences online, and that time we were uncertain yet. There was a little recognition by the WHO and leading health organizations on airborne transmission, but now the story is different. Since late April 2021, it's well recognized the importance of airborne transmission, in particular, short-range airborne transmission. So I first, can you see my slide well? And
Yes,
Yes,
we
sir.
can
We
see.
can
Yeah.
see you.
So I thank all those people who has helped me, and including friends in India, and for the encouragement. Before April this year, before WHO and the US CDC recognized the importance of inhalation and or airborne, and there were two important influential commentaries. One is in the British Medical Journal, one is in Science, and this written by people like us who work with bioaerosols and ventilation. And they simply said the improving indoor ventilation, the air quality, will help us all to stay safe with regarding to the pandemic. And the building ventilation system must get much better. And this is the simple statement from the two commentaries. For ventilation to work, it's actually a simple idea. So if you have indoor pollutants like exhaled infectious aerosols, and then if the ventilation is very large, and you would have the same concentration as outdoors. Outdoors is very low, so that will help. However, when we have the enclosures, actually it's very difficult to achieve the amount of ventilation. And the idea is, how much ventilation do we need in order to minimize a certain indoor air quality risk, in this case, infection risk? And for infection, traditionally, by the time I talked to Indian friends last July or August, we were aware of the short range and the long range transmission. In the long range, we have the possible aerosol transmission and or the aerosol or the touch by formite. Formite is a very terrible word. Not many people know what it meant. And in close range, and we have the possibility of large droplets, short range airborne, and immediate surface touch or immediate surfaces. And we knew then the for the large droplets is really large ones, larger than 50 microns, not the 5 or 10 microns in the literature. And later on, we learned these little few concepts actually quite confusing. And there was a time late last year, and I like to propose a 3 basic, possibly easier to understand concept. And that was called, actually, it's the inhalation of aerosols proposed originally by Professor Lindsay Marr of Virginia Tech. And this is just by inhalation. If I inhale, that's our traditional airborne. And it can be short range and the long range. In short range, you inhale slightly larger droplets. The deposition in the lungs, then the different locations, possibly different. Then you have the drop deposition, or simply this large droplets, this spray, the deposit on the exterior surfaces of your membranes, and then touching and surface touch. Very simple. You avoid touching and table distance away. And these concepts, very simple ones, were later on also recognized by CDC. They also use a similar concept. Instead of airborne, formite, large droplets, we probably call inhalation, deposition, or spray and touch. So I think the chairman mentioned about the Amoy Garden, and that's the first time as an engineer I was involved, and I'm glad to see many engineering studies followed. And now you cannot even read all the papers. And we try to understand the mechanism behind the inhalation, the spray and deposition, touch, and again, human behaviors becomes important when we touch, when we are in close contact with others. The question for SARS-CoV-2 or for influenza viruses is how much contribution from each of the sub transmission rules that we talk about. And traditionally, people like to have some kind of definite statistical analysis. And yes, this one works and this one does not work. But we also have outbreak analysis. And perhaps if we have cause effect analysis from infection data, we can do animal modeling. And I think argument I have here, we can also deduce that from basic physics and the chemistry. And I already reported last year the 2 outbreaks. I would like to reiterate it again, simply because this is one with the most data. And later on, in the second paper, we have proposed second by second video data of that restaurant. So in this restaurant, the middle table against the wall infected 2 tables nearby who they did not know. And the middle table came from Wuhan, and the neighboring 2 tables are local Guangzhou families. And it was interesting that it only infected 2 tables, and we measured the ventilation rate very low. My student right now, they are in Hunan province. There was a boat transmission, and I was told earlier by phone, the ventilation also very poor in that boat. So the ventilation was only 1 liter per second per person, and someone far away and got infected, it was difficult, even that time, to conclude elsewhere also people were infected similarly by the long-range airborne transmission. And the bus outbreak, we are just in time to revise for a journal. And this particular person had 2 bus trips, one large one and one small ones. He infected people on both bus, and the ventilation was greater in the smaller bus, and on this big one is 1.7 liter per second per person. And you know that we normally ventilate our offices at 10 liter, 8 to 10. So on the minibus, it was 3 liter per second, but they had a much lower attack rate. So it's interesting. A larger ventilation led to a lower attack rate. And again, it was a possible evidence for long-range airborne. And this one, we did not have the full video. We only had a few clips of videos. That's already lucky. And modelings also showed it's not possible by other routes. Guangzhou block, I forgot if I talk about this case. That was also the first one of the first studies we did. And in this building, oh, I should mention the bus and the restaurant. Normally you have a trouble to believe because you always think people can meet each other somewhere in the restaurant. But actually they didn't. Even I told everybody they didn't by video, CCTV videos available. Still, people still have this question. Now we have a situation where the family in the flats 1502 were affected. No, infected. Two families above, 2502, 2702. In this outbreak, earlier in Guangzhou, they also had videos in the lift, and they found the two families never met. And of course, we studied using tracer gas, injected tracer gas in room in the flats 1502, and you find how the tracers led to other flats. And we see this is a possible aerosol transmission. But that time, we actually had a wrong perception. We thought of fecal aerosols, and now we know they are actually different. That's a separate story. But anyway, these outbreaks very different because it's between different flats. Interestingly, similar outbreaks, more than 10 of them, occurred in Hong Kong, in Guangzhou. It's interesting, we never observed them reported elsewhere. So basically, the red is a box, every box is a flat. The red infected most flats above. And of course, you want to know why. In all these outbreaks, if you are not on the same column, the infection attack rate almost zero. So this is interesting. They always happen most of the time above, sometimes below. So we propose this is due to the chimney effects, as in the Guangzhou block. And there are sequencing data supporting this role. And as I mentioned, those are very important outbreak studies, but they are one of the thousands, if not millions of outbreaks. How can you be sure the other millions of outbreaks also due to uh, uh, inhalation? And hence I listed 4 basic observations. Close contact transmission appears to dominate. Everybody knows we do social distancing, and most infection occurs indoors. Outdoor infection reported. To me, I only aware of less than, it's in single digit. And then outdoor transmission is much less common. And transmission the long distance only reported in some super spreading events, as I mentioned. So this is interesting. The fact that the risk low outdoors and only indoors had infection is difficult to explain if you believe in large droplets, if you believe in surface touch. So if it is by dilution, and we know that if you're in outdoors at a distance 75 centimeters from you, a common distance between people, then the dilution can be, if I remember, 12 folds. So 1 over 12, 0.008, as compared to at the mouth. So if I give you 0.003, if I in a room, I have a good ventilation, 10 liters per second per person, this concentration is 0.088. However, if the ventilation is very poor, then I have little model after we spoke last summer, and then it's become 0.129. So poor ventilation led to even poorer short range transmission. And that's very, very important. By from this, actually 4 basic principles, then we figure out this whole thing is perhaps short range inhalation dominates with a long range inhalation as its continuum. And normally it happens when the ventilation is poor. So this is very important hypothesis. It remains as a hypothesis, and I hope that more data will support. So I really believe in this hypothesis, which is really makes sense in why it's due to short-range inhalation, and most importantly, short-range inhalation affects ventilation. Because time, I will not get into this little mathematics, and basically shows that if ventilation, what I have just described is interesting. I also find a little, at calm and rest conditions, ventilation 10 liter per second per person will be sufficient. I can also derive those formulas and figure out that probably more than 5. I mean, okay, if you accept that risk, but lower than 5 is certainly not okay. And in the Hunan restaurant, the bus, 3 liter per second per person. I don't use air change per hours. And so this is crucial. If you know normally 10 liter per second per person is okay, we buy that idea. So what happens in different indoor environments? So I adopted in simple sense a equal exposure. And the exposure is very simple. My inhalation rate multiplied by concentration multiplied by time. I assume 2 references, one the room and the reference room. Reference room is still 10 liter per second per person. And by doing that, you can find in the new room the ventilation rate that you need to have is simply 10 liter per second per person multiplied by 2 ratios. Very important concept. One is the source, how much uh, um, uh, aerosols you exhale, and then your inhalation rate. So as your activity increases, you inhale more, and you also exhale more. I mean, one simple assumption would be the number of droplets increase proportionally as your activity level increases. And if you saw, then both of them will increase. And I call that double multiplier. And this double multiplier simply means that if I have 10 ventilation in the office environment, 10 liter per second per person, I exhale quietly, and the other person also inhales quietly. But if in the gym, I exhale violently 5 times more, and another person inhales 5 times more. The ventilation requirement double ratio, 5 by 5, 25. So if 10 there, now you need 250. No one can provide 250 liter per second per person in those environments. And we were not designed for that. We designed for normal ventilation requirement, probably 5 times. So now for respiratory infection, actually you need much more. And this explains why in those environments, karaoke, gyms, dancing floors, people have a higher risk of infection because we design for normal ventilation, and sometimes we don't even provide normal ventilation. And when you do that, you have higher activity level, then you produce more droplets, you inhale more. And this using this principle, I provide ventilation rate for all type of buildings, and then you find out for normal ones, the ventilation rate probably some of them low, some of them okay. And this explains why the infection risk is low on airplanes. And because they have effective 8 liter per second per person. Ventilation rate 4, filtration another 4. But in those gyms, health clubs, you find they only provide the current standard maximum 20 liter per second per person, but we need 200. So that's a differential. And that's why during the infectious period, it's better to close down those business. I know many people like to do gym, and I encourage people to do outdoors. And outdoors, a much better environment as long as the pollution is okay. And this is the same for other spaces, for instance, restaurant. Restaurant, my calculation shows you need 17 liter per second per person. So in Hong Kong, we are actually double the ventilation rate in all more than 20,000 restaurants in Hong Kong by law. This is called dine-in catering premises. I think our Honorable Justice is here. So this particular one, we have regulations and laws that government can do something. So in few months time, all Hong Kong restaurants improve their ventilation, or adding HEPA or with UV. And that I think really helped. It took a lot big effort. I'm aware of only this effort in the world. And this also related to the, if people use carbon dioxide, normally you use probably 1000 ppm, but in a gym, you can only use 500. So gym is a very special environment, and I will not go into details with this. So what we have learned in this pandemic, and that those probably more than 4.5 million people who died, I mean, obviously reported death, most of them should have been infected indoors, and probably more all in poorly ventilated indoors. Thinking of this, I feel is very sad. And this is not indoor air quality problem. This is indoor air quality crisis. It's perhaps more in high activity indoors. High activity indoor spaces may play a role. I must say that it is not really a ventilation problem, because the light and the ventilation is very nice that you consider lighting, which I know less. But this is because ventilation removes gases, pollutants, also fine particles. However, this is about infectious aerosols. So the filtration, disinfection also play a role. You do not necessarily only increase ventilation. You can do that by better filtration and disinfection. So there are two different things. So this is where I think it's important to have this meeting. Normally, environmental crisis leads to a revolutionary change to environment, as we have seen from sanitary revolution in the 19th century in Europe, and later on in Asia, in India and China and elsewhere. And they have and then for the urban air revolution, we had a London for crisis. I know now Indian also faced the crisis. In China, in particularly in Jinji area, we had very serious PM 2.5 crisis. And that actually government adopted mandatory requirement. So the difference between mandatory requirement and the law enforcement is different from voluntary regulation we have now for building ventilation. This is where the law enforcement comes in, but it will have difficulties. And on the other hand, probably with more research, we know how to do it. Probably focus on high activity areas. And it's if you thinking of this, actually this time we really learned both influenza and COVID-19 killed more people than even fire in many countries. And we do fire regulation, why not ventilation regulation? However, this has issues. I think I must mention the issues are that with the carbon neutralization, the need climate change, and this will carry energy use issues. And for people with a ventilation background, we also have, I did not cover non-uniformity and transient environment. I think I bypass that, quickly go to the possible options. And we can make our central air conditioning system in urban environment more powerful, delivering more air, but that has an issue, as I mentioned, with energy requirement. You might install permanent individualized systems and fan and filter units or fan disinfection units. But this again, it means resources, it means energy. And of course, we can make those portable individualized system available, install them when it's needed. And on the other hand, if we make masks available to everybody, that will reduce. I did not discuss if everybody reduce having wear a mask, the ventilation requirement will significantly reduce. If 50% filtration rate, 0.5 by 0.5, 0.25, your requirement will be reduced by 75%. It's very, very significant. So the mask wearing is important. I think, of course, air purifier will work, but there's a lot of debate in terms of some of the systems that are being sold in the in the market. We use HEPA filter, we use UVGI, and sorry, HVAC systems, not HVSC. Anyway, I have no relationship with the manufacturer, just showing them the possibility we can do. I think I like to mention that we now recognize, although still many people don't recognize, the short-range inhalation predominates, and the ventilation for infection control, and that's our life, different from the indoor air quality, normal indoor air quality, which is also our life. When we mention the right to healthy indoor air, because it's double multiplier. And we know the poor ventilation worsens short-range inhalation risk. I probably like to see that it is the poor ventilation that has led to this pandemic. No transmission, no pandemic. If you think in that way, then the ventilation become important. However, as I mentioned, although this is indoor air quality, air safety crisis, matter has to be considered in general other crises in the world. So we are not here to recommending that ventilation has to be provided, all time in all buildings. I think, as I discussed early on, however, it's possible. In terms of mandatory regulation, I believe the law enforcement will be very difficult for such. So the new technologies in terms of monitoring and the better control system will be very useful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure about my time.
Thank you, Professor Yugo Lee. We are really, really grateful to you that you took time today and you, shed light on this important matter. I would request anybody who wants to ask any question. Is there any question? Please, students, if there is any question, please ask. Any of the other delegates, if there's any question, please ask. Okay.
I wanted to ask a
No
question.
questions. So, sir, I will ask you a question regarding the bylaws, sir. Now, there has been a change in bylaws, and our next topic is also about bylaws. With respect to the placement of buildings, how close buildings can be built. Do you think that has an effect on the ventilation overall? And do you think that is something that we should consider?
Yeah, this what I will for I have studied city ventilation of a city. I think India can probably learn from the mistakes that China has made in some part of our country. And for Hong Kong, it's simply too crowded and introduce some other issues. I mean, urban heat island, actually we call her urban cool island. It become cooler during daytime, and also urban moisture. So we have a serious issue, and the wind in part of Hong Kong actually becomes a luxury. Even during typhoon season, you can go outdoors, no problem. The only thing you worry is something falling down. And so the building density in a city is very important. I think you talk about the light also, and we have experts in Hong Kong studying that. I believe that of course a right density will be the best. And there is some studies, and we also published papers on that. And there is a optimum density, and with respect to solar radiation, heat gain into the building. But I must say that for respiratory infection, this is only one aspect, many aspects that need to be considered. Thank you. There are some questions on the chat. Do you want me to answer them?
So there's a question in the chat from Hardeep Singh. He asks, how important is study on surface finishes and materials in reducing transmission of diseases?
I think they are more important for enteric infection. And my colleagues, they published a paper in Science with a hypothesis that most of the respiratory infection probably more due to inhalation, the importance of airborne, and we probably that's our new. We need a lot of work to study that. However, we don't rule out the possibility of involvement surfaces. I worry more about resuspension from surface due to other activities. You shake your hand and then your clothes, and the aerosol may be resuspended in the environment. By doing that, the surface finishes and materials also become important. Um, they are particularly important for enteric diarrhea. I mean, in your country, in this part of the world, Southeast Asia, very, very important. So I believe the surface finishes and the materials, and they are very important, hand washing. Um, we have some papers on that. Yeah, there's another question, interesting question too. Biophilic design is a way forward and made mandatory by laws. This is beyond me, and I think I feel that if any biophilic design can encourage ventilation, um, and we know the air. I think the Honorable Justice also mentioned healthy air. Water we have done reasonably well. I mean, not all in every part of the world, but this is about air supply. Air is not everywhere. In particular, good air is not everywhere. When we enclose the buildings, air is not there anymore. And that's the reason, but putting people there to live for 99% of the time, that's where we need, to do something. But we know the difficulties and challenges ahead. So I think this mandatory requirement will need a little bit of effort. Exactly how to do it, I am aware of different part. OECD had discussion, actually had discussion. Malaysia the other day had a meeting discussion. A lot of countries are discussing, but exactly how we do. But I do know without mandatory requirement, it's almost impossible to get us anywhere.
There's one more question, sir. In the case of healthcare facilities, especially in critical units such as surgical and ICU areas, what ventilation rates would be preferred considering aerosol viral transmission and even in corridor areas? It's a medical question, sir.
Yeah, I think the actually this is also it's really depending whether my recommended ventilation rate will one day be published and accepted. I think in those areas, as long as people are not in the very high activity, then our current design can be used. Actually, our current design is fairly high. For negative pressure isolation rooms, we recommend probably is 12 air change per hour and translating into about 80 liter per second per person, depending on the size. And WHO has a standard for it. For corridors, we have less requirement. And however, if you in hospitals where you have high activity areas, for doctors, you may need higher. It depending who are the sources. I think this ventilation rate requirement is not likely to be agreed upon quickly due to the lack of data. I only presented a interesting to me idea because outdoor content risk is low, so we use that as a reference, and that's how I derive the indoor requirement.
On that, there's a question very relevant, sir. That in India we are struggling with poor outdoor air quality. Most of the classrooms in school rely on natural ventilation. What is your take on opening of schools in India and COVID scenario? This is just related to what you just said.
I think this is now I already differentiate the ventilation requirement for general indoor air quality and inhalation of particles and PM 2.5. So it's all about risk comparison. I mean, if this disease is really something people are scared of, and then open the windows. If you think the outdoor, PM 2.5 is too high, then it's a different story. I think, and this can be determined by identifying if any potential infected persons in the room. Unfortunately, we are getting into we have to make a choice, and this choice is very difficult for teachers and students. I still believe opening windows is a good idea because it's actually help people. However, if outdoor pollution is cannot be controlled, and then I think there's a serious issue for the government. We have to do it better. I believe that if outdoor pollution cannot be resolved, we cannot resolve indoor pollution.
Right, sir. Right. Thank you so much, sir. It's always a choice. It's between the two evils. We have to choose one. Thank you so much. And we are so honored to have Professor Dr. Yugo Lee. There are some more questions which I will ask you through email because we are running short of time. And thank you so much, sir, for coming. And I hope all the people from the law enforcement also took note of this. And I hope we have mandatory laws in India about ventilation and the prevention of spread of airborne diseases. Thank you so much, sir.
I look forward to the day. I'm sorry I will leave, but enjoy the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So now I would like to introduce the next speaker and his topic. The next speaker is architect Premendra Raj Mehta, who's a practicing architect, has a multi-decade practice, and it's an example is he's done the Connaught Place redevelopment project under the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission. He is the ex-president of the Council of Architecture and was the member of the Central Building Research Institute CBRI Roorkee for more than 6 times. He is the chairman of All India Board of Architecture, Town Planning and Applied Art Education of AICT. He has represented India at WTO Geneva. He is a member of Technology Submission of Mission Housing for All. He's also the chairman of NABET, which is a body under the Quality Council of India. And we're really, really glad because sir has a keen interest in bylaws, and his topic is bylaws and public health, experiences from practice. Please, sir, all yours, sir. So please unmute.
Professor Rao, Honorable Justice Goyal, other speakers for today's discussion. Let me first of all thank Professor Rao, Director of SPA, for being kind enough to invite me on this seminar and share some of my thoughts. I will make a presentation and touch upon some of the issues which concern us in practice and which has led to a kind of scenario in urban centers which requires urgent attention. Directly. Just give me a second. Share. Just 1 second, please. Raja, is my screen there?
Not yet, sir. Are you there, sir?
Yeah.
So please share the whole of your screen.
Sorry.
So should you move on to the next speaker while you do the technical thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's better.
Is that okay, sir?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize for the small technical glitch, but because of time, we would request the next speaker. I would introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is architect Dipendra Prasad, who has 2 decades of practice in DPAP. He's a sustainable design architect. You know, he's trained people at UN Habitat, TERI, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, CSC, CPWD, HUDCO, UNDP, and School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He's the founder member of INTBAO and works on appropriate building materials, water harvesting, and community-based planning for educational infrastructure development. He's also comes as a visiting faculty, and his alumni is School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and IIT Delhi. And he's also done his PGD in urban planning from IHS, the Netherlands. We welcome Dipendra sir to this very important webinar, sir. So you're on mute, sir.
I've unmuted myself. Thank you, Raja. Thank you, Professor Rao, for the invitation. Thank you so much, Justice Goel, for your comments, and the other speakers. And I'll start my presentation. Is my slide visible?
So please make it full screen.
Okay. Thank you so much. So yeah, so assuming I'm, the slide is visible, I will start. Yes. Yeah, so I think this is where we are. Basically, this is the world before the pandemic. Can we return here? So I think, of course, we can, and we must. And I think but we have to work hard to make sure that we do. As we were discussing, and as Professor also mentioned, I think architecture and the creation of the built environment have always been about, I think, primarily been about modulating light and ventilation. And it's not just about actually providing the light and the ventilation. You know, really, when we're talking about the built environment, you are providing it as well, but also protecting the people from it. You're protecting people from the sun sometimes. You're protecting people from cold winds and or very hot winds. So it's both. You provide some, you prevent some. Now, we're sitting in the pandemic. Hopefully not in the middle of it, but the pandemics reminded us. Of course, we always knew that I think failure on the aspect of providing adequate light and ventilation will cause serious problems, very serious problems. Now, we have been talking about health and the virus pandemic for the past 2 years. We've been having a number of discussions and so on. But it is the buildings where we are actually spending most of our time. In fact, because of the lockdowns and all, we spend even more time in the buildings. And it is really the buildings which are not being designed to prevent this infection. And as Professor Lee presented, I think that's where the major problems in a way are. Now, I think one approach, traditionally has been has been on how to look at providing more open buildings so that the indoors sort of also mirrors the outdoors. So this is, let's say, a school project. There were some questions about school buildings, and I'm a certain supporter of opening the schools. I think the mental issues which the children are facing are more serious, and we have to deal with the aspect. We have to open the windows, and we have to make sure these are there. So in this particular school project, let's say, and this is a modern building, this is not a very old building. One is talking about the courtyards, which you would have over there. You were, also talking about, sorry, the presentation went out. Yeah, its presentation is here again. Let me just, yeah. So we were talking about, the courtyards. We were talking about, the recessed windows. We were talking also about ventilators. So, ventilators in the classrooms, they provide a more generic spread out light and so on. Now, this has been the traditional approach. Now, what do you do about, the current building syndrome where we're trying to go fully air conditioned, very high tech buildings and so on. So that's where I think the current movement, the current very active movement on green buildings comes into the picture, where we realize that I think we have gained some successes in reducing the energy consumption and water consumption. Of course, these are individual buildings, not at a city scale. I think that's where some other issues like broader transportation, etc., still need to be addressed. But I feel, and I think a lot of us share that feeling that broader building health issues have remained unattended. So we have the sick building syndrome, we have fungal growth within buildings, we have viral spreads. I mean, it's not just COVID, which we're talking about, but even the common cold spreads, hugely in a building which would have bad ventilation. And of course, then we're talking about vitamin deficiencies, so many articles on that. It's a public health issue, fluctuating body rhythms, because all of our buildings are having inadequate light, and what I call as exposure to the solar dome. The solar dome is the sky around us. If we can't see the sky, if we can't get light, indirect light, even from the sun, then our body, doesn't respond to that. And there are various aspects or various effects, ill effects, so as to say. So a large number of modern air-conditioned buildings are now going on the path of
Hello?
of the Ministry of Environment and Forests in Delhi, Central Delhi, and Justice Goyal is very much connected to it. This is an example of a green building where together with the CPWD, we were also consulting. And that's where, we have a large solar bank installed on the top. But besides being a solar, it's also a shade. The walls are protected, insulated. The glass is insulated. So protecting the envelope all around protects the building from a lot of heat gain, which reduces, in a big way, it's dependent on air conditioning. Despite being a very modern building, a high-tech building, it allows for open windows. If you have a good day, good weather times, you can open your window. A lot of us are overcooling. So we're bringing it down set points to 20 degrees, 22 degrees. But what is a healthy set point? A healthy set point provides a good interface between the outside and the inside. You're coming from the outside, you don't get a thermal shock. So the set point here is 26 degrees plus minus 1. Treated fresh air is provided within the air conditioning system. And you have zoning of different areas separately to minimize or reduce the infection from spreading. So that's again a modern building, but it's pre-COVID. Now this is a project in Panchkula. Again, it's an office building. It's post-COVID, again for the government. So that's where, again, besides the provision of open windows, fresh air, and all the things which I talked about in the previous slide, again, some of the technology is now coming in, where you are in a way talking about aspects like UVGI systems, ultraviolet systems, which you put in the supply ducts of the AHU, the return ducts, so that the supply air and the returning air both are disinfected from viruses and other bacteria as well. That is a technology which has been there in the health sector for a long time, and now mainstream buildings are adopting this. This is already installed in this particular project, one of the first large scale.
So we cannot see your screen. Hello. So, are you there? Okay, while we get architect Dipendra Prasad back, I would request architect Premendra Raj Mehta sir if he can join now.
Oh, hold on, it's still a problem. Still a problem.
Mehta sir, are you there?
Sometimes still getting corrected. Yeah.
So please share your screen.
1 second. Yeah.
Prasad sir,
Yeah. 1 second.
we had lost you.
Okay.
You
1
can
second.
conclude, sir. You can conclude in a minute, sir.
Yes, I will. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll get back to the presentation.
Prasad sir, I think there has been some confusion. So if we can let Mehta sir present.
So I'll
We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you, sir.
So I'll basically, I think, end on one particular point, which is that, yeah. So I think without the slide, I think the broad point can be still said. And that is that I think there are no lack of codal guidelines which are there. I think there are many, but I think they need to be followed. Secondly, how do we ensure quality in this particular production? So there, I think, three broad guidelines which are there. One is National Building Code and individual codes like SP 41. They're recommendatory and they're probably not forcing people to do this. Building bylaws are there. They are providing minimum provisions, but many results are not encouraging. Now we are putting our trust in certain green building rating systems like the wellness system, GRIHA, IGBC, where we are expecting that the pull of the market and a premium on adequate provisions comes into the play. The market will ask for it. So I believe that an important missing link is basically, again, educating the public to demand this as a right. And I think this is, in fact, a point to Justice Goel as well, where we say that this particular aspect of light and ventilation is not just a market commodity. It's a right which the public must have. If a builder has not given this, then one should be able to approach the courts and get relief. And there has to be, secondly, a continuous sensitization of the professionals and their very important interaction with medical professionals, researchers, so that we are not designing in isolation and we are working together with the relevant professionals to get the best outputs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was very enlightening. And, if there's some questions, I will make a note and we'll ask at the end of the seminar, sir.
Okay, Raja,
Mehta sir, please,
screen?
can you join
Okay,
in, sir?
can you
Please
see my screen?
Share your screen, sir.
Can you see my screen now? Can you see my screen now?
We can see the screen, but no content.
No content. Okay, content of answer. Raja,
Yes,
can you
we can
see
see
the
now,
screen
sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So let me take all of you 25 years back, 50th year of India's independence, when the parliament resolved that every citizen shall have shelter and drinking water. And this is exactly what Honorable Justice Goel made a mention, that shelter, habitation and water, they go together. So this is what it was resolved. Then I take you another 25 years back, sometime in late 60s, early 70s, during the passage of Architects Bill, while it was under consideration of the House. During the debate, it was said that the role of architecture, while discussing the importance of the subject of architecture and profession of architecture, it was said that it would fulfill the requirement of functions. The spaces will be functional if there is an architect. It also said that it will ensure comfort, and practice of profession will also ensure safety. So these were the three key points which were talked about in favor of the passage of the bill, and it became an act in 1972. Now let us look at what are these safety issues in architecture, in built environment, in urban development. You see, one is life safety, which is dealt with by structural engineering, electrical engineering, and fire safety. You see, these are related to life safety. But the other important thing is health safety, which is determined by the quantum of light, quantum of ventilation, the availability of water supply, drainage, and most importantly, the sewerage system. So the inflow of water and then outflow of discharge, they are paramount to the health safety requirement of a habitat. Then let's look at what is health safety net for public. You see, if that is the objective, how do we deal with it? So one is architecture and town planning education. You prepare professionals, you prepare a professional support system for the society in which the thought process goes into how to ensure that health would be, health safety will be there while we construct buildings or we create architecture. The second part of the safety net is development control norms and building bylaws. You see, this is the part of a regulatory mechanism to ensure that what is required as bare minimum in terms of light, ventilation, water supply, sewerage, drainage would be provided for. And the third part of the safety net is that there will be municipal services, particularly when we are talking of urban areas, and infrastructure which will proactively facilitate what is provided in the regulatory regime and what professionals think is a requirement for minimum light, ventilation, water, and drainage. So this is the safety net which the lawmakers thought would be available to us. But what has gone wrong? We have an urban population in India, which is 30%, likely to become 40 very soon, another decade. And thereafter, I do not know what would be the progression, but there are studies which indicate that it may go up to 50%. But look at the situation now. Out of 30%, 50% of the urban development is unplanned, unauthorized, as they say. But people live there. So 50% of the population lives in unplanned area, and half of it is actually slums. So net to net, 15% of India is already deprived of this safety net. There are no professionals, there is no regulatory regime, there is no mechanism where municipal facilities could be made available to them in the required quantity or number. Let us look at what is happening to the remaining half of the population, which is in the planned area. So here, the peculiarity is that every 20th year, when we have a master plan, you increase density, you increase FAR, you increase ground coverage. So ultimately, the word planned and unplanned have become synonymous. You see, you planned for X density, you developed an infrastructure for X density, suddenly you double the density, you double the FAR to achieve that double the density, you increase ground coverage, and finally the municipal system stops working. It is overstretched, as some people may say, but actually not even fit to deal with that. Just to take some instances of Delhi for the remaining half, ground coverage in plots up to 100 square meters has become 100%. Where do you get light and ventilation from? You see, 3 sites you're blocked. You're back to back with your neighbor, and there is no possibility of any natural light to come in from the longer sides of the building and one shorter side. So what you have is one aperture on the face, and the entire building, the depth, supposing if I'm talking of 100 square meters of plot, it is whatever 30 feet by 60 feet or something. The rooms are one behind the other, and we expect that this would happen. So this is not there. FAR you have doubled, and now drainage and sewers overflow. So the process of entire making new master plan, new bylaws after every 20 years is that what you do is you increase FAR, you have concepts of purchasable FAR, you have transfer of development rights from one place to another without guaranteeing that there would be minimum sun or minimum water or minimum fresh air which will be ensured and provided to every person. So net to net, what you have done, you have vitiated the entire natural ecosystem. You see, this is what we have done ourselves. So the implication is of this over density, under provisions of sewer, under provision of drainage, no possibility of light entering, no possibilities of air entering into your building. We have indoor air quality, which is substandard and stale. Outdoor air quality has become pathetic and acidic. You see, you go into certain areas in Delhi, the metal corrodes by itself. You put your car outside, it is gone after a few years. Your refrigerator, though it is inside, it is eaten away. The metal does not stay. You see, it goes. So that's the kind of situation we have created for ourselves. But people thought that they need to protect themselves. So the first thing they did is that let not any air come from outside. The acidic air or the poor quality of air, let it not enter. So windows are closed. Then they think that if I install a cooler or air conditioner, something good will happen. Air coolers will maybe filter the air. Air conditioners will help me have better air quality inside, and some more gadgets of purifiers and other things. So people have started installing it. These gadgets have also started solving the problem which is available, maybe imagined, maybe not properly understood, but none actually attempts to solve the root cause of these problems. So we have air coolers, air conditioners, air purifier, and so on. And what they ultimately end up doing is they bring in poor outside air inside, thinking that it is better. And the other exercise which is done is we keep on recycling the poor indoor air, what we have, be it with air conditioners, be it with fan, whatever gadget we have, we keep on recirculating it. So that is what we inhale. And the net output is actually a disaster. We spread and increase all respiratory diseases. We overburden the healthcare system, and the will of the people expressed through the parliamentary laws is squarely defeated only by those who were entrusted to implement it. So that is where we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Architect Premendra Raj Mehta, sir. Sir has multiple years of experience and he has shared his experience. We are very grateful. If there are any questions, please put it in the chat box. We will ask sir at the end of this online webinar. Now I have to rush to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Advocate K.C. Mittal. Sir is ex-chairman Bar Council of Delhi. He is also the president of the Delhi High Court Bar Association, and he's been practicing since 1972. This is his 50th year of practice. I want to thank sir because it is only sir's push that we work in this area, and this webinar is today possible only because of the push that was given to us by K.C. Mittal, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. I request you to please share your views with our participants.
Unmute करती. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Professor Rao, Director SPA, Mr. Mehta, Mr. Prasad, and other dignitaries. In fact, if I begin with saying that how the whole chain started. As a resident of Delhi since 1963, where I've seen, as far as the pollution and the problem are concerned, lately I was more concerned and worried about the centrally air-conditioned buildings where the High Court Chief Justice took a suo motu notice as far as their own High Court building is concerned. And when certain orders were passed, that didn't perhaps help much. When I noticed it and having realized, we discussed amongst ourselves the impact of COVID-19 and how the aerosol can spread the COVID in a centrally air-conditioned building. Then I moved an application before the High Court in the same petition where the court gave a direction, they administratively examined the whole issue, where I think CPWD and some judges and a lot of them were involved. And finally, what happened was the outcome today is that the High Court building has a ventilation. This is how it took a change. It's really today, if somebody comes and sees the High Court building, and building is not, the air condition is not as it used to be earlier, and now they have provided a ventilation and everything. I think it took few months. The issue ultimately, perhaps Raja Singh and Diwan Saab, those who have also ultimately realized, and since they have been working on this subject, the issue came up very promptly, because we also realized, after myself having realized after having discussed with both of them, that what is happening, we are having centrally air conditioned buildings with no outside ventilation. We are having railways, we are having DTC buses where there is no ventilation, causing a spread of COVID. Therefore, it's something which was a very serious thing, which is happening even now. And then we took up this and filed a PIL. Raja Singh was filed a PIL in the High Court, and I'm glad to share with all of you that the Division Bench of Delhi High Court gave a very good direction to all the governmental agencies to frame bylaws and come out with this solution, because this is something which is affecting health of everybody, whosoever is in the building or whosoever visits. I don't know, so far perhaps we were trying, we have been moving around, we met the minister also and gave him the court order and certain details about it, when Mr. Diwan and Mr. Raja Singh and other friends were also there. Why I'm mentioning all this is that in addition to this, I'm just clubbing another issue where, as a resident of Delhi, what is my another concern? I've been noticing, as Mr. Mehta also pointed out and Mr. Prasad also referred to all that, and perhaps Mr. Yugo Lee also referred about it. What is happening in Delhi? I don't know what are the planners and what is this master plan business is going on and how it is being done. Do they really bother about public health? Public health is a fundamental right. Look at the kind of buildings that have come up after MPD 2021. The whole Delhi, everybody is facing the vitamin D problem. There is no air circulation. There is no sunlight circulation, which are the fundamental requirements of a human being. But what are we doing? The builder will come out with a building, he will encroach upon, he will go beyond his boundaries, leave no place, no space for air circulation or for sunlight. And people having money, they go and buy and start living, and then they make it fully air conditioned, blocking completely the ventilation and air from outside. What are we doing? What kind of the development is this? And believe me, and all of you know, I think 99% people living in such buildings, they are facing these kind of problems apart from the airborne diseases. And now they are coming out with the 2041. Mr. Mehta rightly pointed out that you increase FAR every time and density of population. What are we doing? What is happening? Will anybody check it? We are practically being trapped. Being trapped. Why? Because somebody, I don't know whether what plays a role, but the MPD, whether it is 2021 or whether it is 2041, this has completely ignored the public health. The question therefore is, we have been debating and talking about it. Number one, whether, and I requested Siddhivan also, and I request all of you, and particularly Dr. Rao, you are the core authority. You have the core power. You are the main authority to teach the fundamentals to your architects. But what happens when the municipality or the MPD, they plan, they come out with master plan, they do something different? Why can't we make sure that the air and sunlight circulation is ensured in every building and every floor? Mr. Mehta rightly pointed out, left, right, and back. You see, it's totally covered. You hardly get any sun or light. Those are the basic problems where, apart from the central air-conditioned buildings, these problems are increasing day by day, and nobody seems to be addressing on all these problems, which is affecting every resident of Delhi. I thought perhaps when we came out for this centrally air-conditioned building issue, we wanted to come out with programs where, like mass awakening, so that people can just understand and realize how important is the ventilation. How do we dilution of ventilation? How best we can educate? How can we enforce? How much and in what manner we can compel the authorities that before you make any master plan or before you enforce or the building bylaws, please make sure that this is not only made mandatory, but this is also enforced, and anybody violating should face the consequences. Unfortunately, what is happening in the country and what is we know all of them, how the building bylaws are flouted, what happens and how it happens. There is hardly any enforcement of building bylaws. Let me just tell you an example. Even now, I've been noticing all these prime colonies in Delhi. The recent buildings, how it has come up. The builder will encroach. He will go even out of his boundary, cover 100%, left, right, center, and goes multi-storied. Although there was a challenge in the Supreme Court, but what happened? The challenge also failed, because that petition has now been is no more pending in the Supreme Court. It has gone to the tribunals, the municipal tribunals, where nothing is going to happen as far as the third floor part is concerned, which is of course under the undertaking given to the municipal corporation. But the question, and I will request the SPA and Mr. Diwan and Mr. Raja saying, let us involve more and more people on this, because we have to save the life. We have to save the health of the people. It is our primary responsibility. Even if the authorities do not follow it, if they don't do it, we all have to join together. And SPA being the prime institution, having this as its fundamental to educate and enforce. I don't know why, when the master plan is being finalized, SPA role in it. SPA's approval or the consent. How can the government proceed on those lines? Because you are the authority where you can definitely tell the government that don't do this or do this, because otherwise this is where the public health is going to be affected. So my request to all of you is join together to save the life or the health of the people. We are, let me tell you very frank, every day Delhi is a burning fire. It's a burning, what is that, chamber? And a lot of things are being said about it. And we are living in such an environment. Everybody's health and children's, aged people, and everybody is getting, and most of the people have airborne problems, respiratory problems. Therefore, it's high time when we should all join together and come out, see to it that our health is protected and we are safe and secure. At least we get a fresh air, we get a pure air, a quality air to breathe. I hope and I request all of you, let us plan and work out. With that, Dr. Rao and Mr. Raja Singh for having given me this opportunity and organize this webinar on this burning and issue, more public health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very movingly, sir. I hope all the you said issues, and we have made note of everything that you have said, and all our students, all our fellow professionals have made a note, and we will work together in this area so that this area, there is some work on this, and we get the realization of the right to healthy environment in our cities. Thank you so much, Advocate K.C. Mittal, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you.
If there's some questions, please put them in the chat so that we can ask Advocate Sir at the end of the webinar. Now, I'll take the permission to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Satish Kaipelyawar. Dr. Satish is a output or a very, his contribution is there because he studied in TISS, that is Tata Institute of Social Studies, where he is a master's in health administration, and he also was under the Colombo Plan Fellowship. He's also an MBBS doctor, and he's worked at PATH in TB and infectious diseases. He was in Piramal Swasth. He's the team lead in Share India, and he's now the associate program director of Nishchit Star Share India project, along with CDC, or the Center for Disease Control, United States. He has, a lot of feathers in his cap. He's introduced the hepatitis B vaccine. He's done advocacy and capacity building, and he's also, done so much work in the area of ventilation. He was a medical officer in very remote and small public health centers, and he has the experience from the grassroots. And we are very happy and grateful and honored that he's here to share his experiences on the topic called how small changes in the built environment can solve mighty public health problems. Over to you, Dr. Satish Kaipelyawar.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this excellent platform. I myself have learned a lot of things here. All respected dignitaries, Honorable Justice Goyal ji, K.C. Mittal ji, Mehta ji, Dipendra Prasad ji, and Professor Lee. And thanks for inviting me on this wonderful platform, Professor Diwan and Architect Raja. Really grateful to you. We have all come together. I think it's a beginning. Together we can take this forward. And we have known about the law position, what needs to be done. And now I will be talking on how things have to be done. If there is an intention, how things needs to be done. So my experience goes way back when I remember biomedical waste management and handling rules of 1998. From that time, I started on infection prevention and control, right from injection safety, safe management of injection waste, needle stick injuries, hepatitis B, hepatitis C prevention and all. So from there it started, and now it has come to the infection prevention and control. So 2008 to 2021, I'm going to talk about a journey from there. I have no commercial conflict of interest, but I do have conflict of interest in saving human lives, promoting quality of life, and creating happy faces in the community. I strongly believe that we all should really work towards this. And I would like to acknowledge upfront the USAID, PATH, National TB Program, Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, National TB Elimination Program, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and my parent organization, Share India, for whom I am indebted to. Overcrowding, we have seen it everywhere, and these are some of the glimpses of the pictures from different hospital settings from different parts of the country. And overcrowding is really a problem. And respiratory diseases occur in high transmission settings. These are the pictures from a typical morning in any hospital you go and visit. You will find this sort of things. So I need not go into the details about the droplets and droplet nuclei, but they are the vehicles for transmission, and transmission is very unpredictable, and it is the indoor business. As Professor Lee has said, it is the indoor business that we need to really correct ourselves with. And so are we really safe going into such environments? We'll have to really think about that. So some interventions can really prevent or reduce the transmissibility. And one such is now we are promoting masks, we are promoting coverage of cough. So respiratory diseases occur in high vulnerable or transmission settings. And high vulnerable and transmission settings are hospitals, TB and HIV clinics, the health posts, the dispensaries, the health centers, maternity homes, clinics, private, government, and also now we should really think about schools, cinema halls, malls, supermarkets, prisons, slum, refugee camps, etc. And what is our role? And how do we address all this? So pilots were conducted in 2008 to 2010 in West Bengal, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh. And that led to the building national guidelines for infection control in 2010. And three main components are spoken about in this guideline, national guideline. This is available on the website. So they talk about administrative and managerial controls, environmental controls, and personal protective equipment. So my outline of my presentation would be like this. How do we really do all this? Now, if there is an intention, now intention is really getting built up. We have forced the intention to really get built up, and we all feel that this is a necessity, and it is our personal right to really be safe in these environments. So now, when we have made that decision, how do we really implement this? So we have an experience of around 15 to 20 years now, and putting all that together, I have put this across into a few slides. So how do we establish a unit? There has to be a unit which collectively looks after all this activity. Not any one individual will be able to really do. Now you can see here, there are architects, there are lawyers, there are judges, there are public health professionals. There are different people who are working together to actually take this happen. So we have put in together a model also. And then after doing all this, everyone should be really trained properly to really take this forward. Then what would be the implementation steps? What would be the results of all this? What challenges do we face? What lessons we learned in this? And how do we really overcome those lessons? And then how do we measure our successes in terms of monitoring? And then also I'll talk about a little bit about scale up. So a dedicated infection control unit is really the need of the hour. And as I said, the required support and intention has to be there to really drive this. The required support and intention is really coming up now. And I'm very happy that this platform has really made us aware that there is an intention, there is a leadership which is really emerging, which really wants to address this issue. So what is the combined skill set required for all this? So as I said, it is not one individual's activity, but it's a combined skill set that has to come really together to take this forward. So experience of knowledge of healthcare facilities to perform facility risk assessments, then clinical experience of respiratory diseases and knowledge of national programs, understanding of bacteriology and infectious diseases, understanding of building structures and how and when they can be changed, how they can be modified, that needs to be really looked into. Experience with monitoring program performance also, because we need to also see how we are performing. Are we really reaching the milestones? Are there any mid-course corrections? We need to really look into all this. So this is a combined skill set, which I would say would really go into an infection control unit, which should be really built and work together on this. So we have put an attempt to build a unit around this, and we thought that the nurse, the public health nurse, who is at the institution level, is the implementer of all this. So that is a very important position within the team. The microbiologist who really understands the real things, the nitty-gritties of the system there. Experienced TB physician, architect and engineer. We make sure that there is always one architect or engineer in our team so that he really helps us take these things forward. Then a monitoring and evaluation expert and a project manager to manage all this. So we had a very careful interview process and we selected very passionate individuals to really join us in this mission. And so highly focused, intense, hands-on training was provided. It consisted of didactics and practical sessions, hands-on experience, and we even trained people, taking them to the field and how to do these assessments. We have really done to that extent. And some of the equipments which we use here, I did not really explain this to you people. Is radiometer, laser tapes, smoke tubes, very simple. And if the smoke tubes are not available, even we have used agarbatti and demonstration of a burning of a tissue to actually see the wind flow. So what process we have really taken? What we have done is we have implemented this in 4 to 5 states now, like in West Bengal, as I said, in Andhra Pradesh, in Gujarat, and in Maharashtra also. In Mumbai also we have implemented this project all across. So what we did first step was to enlist all the institution, estimate what time is required for this assessment, develop a micro plan, then do a baseline assessment. And once a baseline assessment is done, we provide recommendations, and those recommendations are reviewed every 4 months so that whatever is suggested there is getting implemented and the compliance is adhered to. Such follow-ups we do every 4 months so that whatever good practices we have put in there are sustainable for a longer term. And these are some of the standard operating procedures which we have really developed. And this is out of an experience of almost 10 years that you are seeing these 3 bullets here and the sub bullets within this. So these are very, very essential. We need to really first sensitize the whole of the ward or the whole of the town, all the health officials there as to what this exercise is about. And this is not an inspection. This is not a watch on them, but it is helping them to really making their premises infection control compliant. So that sensitization need to really first go. Then followed up with, we will have to do an assessment as to where does this institution stand. We have a set of indicators, 40 odd indicators we apply to the institutions, and then we study very closely the patient flow. We study the health facility, its functions, its floor plan, air flows, air exchange, how many people really come in there. And then if there are problems, we also understand and discuss those problems with the healthcare providers there, because we might be giving solutions which are not implementable there. So we will have to really talk to them, understand their problems, and then come up with a debriefing meeting to say that this is the assessment, this is the report, and this is what we together need to do. And we have seen to it that always the healthcare professionals of that institutions also take part in our assessment, so that there is always an ownership which is built up within the institution. And then the post-assessment, we further follow it up by sending the emails to the concerned officials. We provide all the reports in a file folder and we hand it over to the institutions so that they are preserved there for our next visit. When we come to the next visit, at that time, we pull out those folders and then see where did we stand last time and did we really progress after that? Or are we at least sustaining what we have informed? So this is the way we do this. And now my team has actually standardized all these processes. And I can proudly say that we take around 320 minutes per assessment. So it is less than 6 hours of time. We can produce an assessment report. So these are some of the steps, and this is some of the standard time which my team takes. And so I would like to also mention here that when we did our first assessment, we took around 7 days to produce a report. And over a period of 6 months, we standardized ourselves and we really brought it down to daily one institution we can assess and provide the report. So this is the kind of finesse, this is the kind of speed which my team has really developed over time. So manage crowding to prevent disease transmission. This is very, very important. A small word, crowding, internal crowding is really, really a problem. So understand the process of patient flow. How many people are really having footfalls within that institution? We need to study the floor plans. We have to recognize problems and of overcrowding. We need to brainstorm solutions along with them. So understand implementers' perspective and then develop a general consensus and then discuss a way forward. So I'm going to actually present with you some of the actual floor plans and other things where you will be able to really understand what this is. So here we can see an institution which has got around 150 to 200 footfalls in this institution. And the institution typically consists of the registration room, the medical officer's room, the laboratory, the pharmacy, and all. So we have to really look into the process flow here. We have to see how the crowd enters into an institution, how they go to the registration, and after the registration is over, how does that person goes into the registration room and the waiting area where they go on crowding there. So a lot of crowd is seen in the waiting areas. We need to then see how the person goes to the medical officer's room. Typically, this is the flow. And from the medical officer's room, either he will go to the pharmacy or he will go to the laboratory for investigations. So looking at all this, we need to understand where the overcrowding is really happening and how can we prevent that overcrowding. This is the simplest diagram which we could reproduce. As you can see, this is the entry to the institution premises, and I've given a legend here where general OPD is colored with blue, TB patients are colored with red, and coughing patients are colored with violet, and immunization babies who are little babies who come for immunization. These are some of the tracks. So all these tracks, they enter here and they actually wait in this waiting room. So there is a lot of crowding of healthy patients, healthy little babies, healthy patients, and also the coughing patients there. So a lot of transmission, as Dr. Lee has mentioned, happens in this waiting area. So we need to really urgently decongest these waiting areas. So how did we do that? We actually provided different pathways and we provided these different areas for entry. Now here for the lab, the person can directly enter from outside to the lab. We open the window here and he can deposit the sputum sample there. Similarly, the immunization babies can straight away go to the institution without any mixing there. And so the registration counter also was open from outside. So people actually go from outside. There is no waiting here. So crowd is completely well managed here within this. So this is how we actually did in the institutions. And some of the pictures I'm going to share with you here, before after pictures. This is one of the urban health centers. And here there was a playground here and there was a lot of overcrowding within the institution. So we created a small shed here and a waiting area and pulled out all the crowds here for waiting. And then there was a grill which was to be opened, a simple intervention, but that really prevented the overcrowding there. So similarly, this is a pediatric drug-resistant TB OPD, and here we can see all the rooms were closed because they wanted AC and they wanted a cool environment there. So we then asked them to remove all this and open up all the ventilation there so that there is a free flow of air within the institution there. And similarly, these are the pictures of the closed doors and the open doors. So this also will provide them free. So simple interventions to do. Same thing here again. So there are certain immediate interventions. The moment we do our assessments, they immediately modify. They modify the timings, they modify the access. Now, some of the patients can be actually called in the morning. Some of the patients can be called in the afternoon. So we can really decongest the crowds. So fast track symptomatic can be done. So if a person is coughing there, he can jump the queue and he can actually directly go to the medical officer and see. So there are certain long-term interventions also where involvement of some construction work or some refurbishments is done, for which some budget allocations need to be then done for that. So how did we persuade people to actually get these things done? So the assessment visit reports to the facility director so that the facility director has got all this information at his hand. He can review it in these monthly meetings. And we also did some periodic follow-up phone calls to the facility director to understand what compliance is really achieved by that time. And then we convinced all the decision makers for actionable items. And also, we had a sensitization meeting of all the architects and engineers of the Greater Municipal Corporation, where we have taken them through all the infection control measures which the institutions have taken up. And then if there are any refurbishments that are required, we have brought in that, our architect has brought in that as a plan to them, and they executed it. So progress, as I said, we also have monitored our progress, and on our subsequent baseline, first follow-up and second follow-up, we have really made some progress, and the progress is still on. The graph is still going up now. So this is just a glimpse of first and second follow-up. We have done such 5 follow-ups. So what are the lessons we learned here? Once sensitized, the facility staff want to adhere to AIC, but the challenges still exist there. Administrative and managerial recommendations are very quickly followed. It's a low-hanging fruit, so you see the bars really going up there. And recommendation that requires construction and budget allocations and processes are a little time-consuming, so they take a little more time. But with the right approach, we are able to really crack that also. And need for a periodic review at highest level in order to influence continuing compliance. This is very, very important, that we have to bring up this at the highest level of the institution, where we actually give them the reports, and the institution director or the highest authority really reviews this on a periodic basis. Only then these activities really go forward. So resource allocation for dedicated team is a must. And so for any activity, we need to have resources in place and all the manpower in place to really take this forward. Insufficient budget and cumbersome processes for refurbishments was a time-consuming process for us. And staff turnover also. Nursing staff, architecture staff, we had a lot of turnover of this staff because they were still not able to find the importance it attracted, or it was really not very lucrative for them to really continue on. So I would request from this platform, Professor Devan, I have already requested that we need to really generate that interest amongst these young professionals to really take on these challenges. And the lucrativeness or the monetary things would really come and fall in place, because it is a huge need of the hour, and we need professionals to really work around. And India is such a vast country, so there is a lot of work for many of the people there. So we have to sensitize and motivate specialization in public health, and architects and nurses, highlight role of infection control in every faculty, motivate health facility staff on compliance. And another aspect is healthcare worker surveillance. This is a difficult area to implement within the health institutions. We need to have a surveillance of healthcare workers, where we, on a periodic basis, we check their health status as to if we are putting everything in place. I'm sure the healthcare surveillance would also improve, because we see many of the healthcare people also getting infected today. So we can prevent all that if we do the surveillance. So now I'll be talking about monitoring, dashboards, and grading institutions. So what we have done is, you can see these dashboards where we have a set of indicators and we have a set of facilities. And you see some red color here, some green color here, some blue color here. So all the red color indicates that things are not implemented, and all the green colors indicate that things are implemented. There is compliance. And blue color is either it is not applicable or it is in progress. So we have done this for baseline. This is our baseline assessment. You can see a lot of red colors here. And then in the first assessment itself, it has changed to a lot of greens. So the compliance can be actually looked into. So this kind of dashboards are really loved by the decision makers, the people who are at the helm of affairs, at the head of the institutions. They actually love to see these dashboards, and it is very easy for them to make out whether my institutions are really doing well or not. And see, now this is the second assessment. And so as we reach to the fifth assessments, the red color slowly gets disappeared. So that means to say that we are complying and we are doing that. Added to that, we also have done a grading system which we introduced, where all the 4 quadrants you can see, right lower quadrant, it is 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, and then 51 to 75. And so what we did, every indicator we have given a mark, and we have graded these institutions. So at the baseline, at the baseline, we had a lot of institutions which fell into 0 to 25 categories, a very few into 26 to 50 category, and one or two here, and none in the green category. So as we moved forward, you can see that these categories are then moving as per the arrow here. The first follow-up, you started getting some greens there. So similarly, all these are now moving towards green. So what I'm trying to say is this also gives healthcare institutions a motivation to see that in which quarter they are falling into. So it self motivates them to perform better, comply better, and take these activities forward. So this is one of the drug-resistant TB centers in a large hospital where we have just done this intervention. So optimum ventilation, you can see a lot of light coming in, lot of ventilation in the wards, and lot of airborne infection control measures implemented. So this has actually reduced the incidence in the last 2 years. TB deaths have reduced, and absenteeism due to TB also has reduced. So we are already seeing results. And before we started the work, there were a lot of these issues, which even you people also have witnessed in the newspapers, that so many deaths, so many healthcare workers really getting affected. Now the situation is really getting under control. So as I said, all those good activities also need to be highlighted at a higher level. At the national, we had a national stakeholders meeting. We released documents, guide on airborne infection control for health institute, infrastructure planners and implementers. This was the highest body at the central level where we disseminated our findings, and around 10 to 15 states have really come forward to take this activity forward. So I finally acknowledge again the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, NTEP program, USAID PATH Center for Disease Control, and Share India. And this is my team which works from Mumbai. Currently, my team which works from Mumbai, who are the movers and shakers. I would say all the good work which they have done, all the things which you have seen now is the contribution of my team. And I'm thankful to the team and for all of you for a patient listening. I would take the questions as per.
Thank you. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. So, sir, we'll take the questions at the end. And sir, it was so great that you shared your experiences from so many years. And today you are leading the effort. People don't know about it, but you're leading the effort to make sure all our healthcare, small level health centers become, the spread of airborne infection is reduced in those healthcare centers, especially in the TB, which still has a high load in our community. I would like to now request our next speaker. Our next speaker is Ms. Ridhima Kaul, who's the lead health science and environment at Hindustan Times. And all that great research that we academics do, it's only because of people like Ridhima ma'am that we can actually get to hear that, and we are so well versed with what's happening only because of health writers like ma'am. She's also in the Hindustan Times Health Bureau, and she's formerly worked at Mail Today, and she's an alumni of JNU. We welcome you, ma'am. It's all yours, ma'am. Ma'am, mute.
So thank you so much for those kind words. Good evening, everyone. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me over for this webinar. Professor Diwan, thank you so much. And what intrigued me when you had introduced this webinar to me, the topic I was told about this webinar was the topic that built environment and public health. So this was something that immediately struck a chord with me because I have been covering health now. Been with Hindustan Times for almost 2 decades now. I have been covering health, public health actually. So, and I must say the organizers couldn't have chosen the more topical issue. Why I say so? Because we are in the middle of a devastating pandemic, if you realize. And how we live and how we behave, that has had a direct bearing on how this pandemic has shaped up. So, it could have been controlled long back probably, but the way we are living, I mean, especially urban areas, the way they are planned, I mean, that has had a direct impact on the spread of the virus. So it's mostly the urban areas that we have seen, which are being affecting and where it has spread the fastest, I would say. And key reasons, as I said, I've been speaking to a lot of health experts, and they said one of the reasons why urban areas are more affected is because of the close proximity, the infrastructure, the way we have planned our cities. That has been one of the areas which has been of concern. And obviously, these are the things that cannot be changed overnight. So if there are 20 people living in a particular in a flat, for example, you can't change that. I mean, if there are two flats running into each other, you cannot change that. That doesn't happen. Is in a very, very bad shape. So these are the things, which is why I thought that, how this whole concept of buildings and public health, we don't give too much thought on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it's sad, but even if when we go and buy a flat, for example, if we go recce, then we don't think about these minute things. Probably there could be an infectious disease sometime later in future. Are we well protected? How is the building design? How is the ventilation? Where is our light coming from? I mean, we at the most we see, whether it's east facing or it's a west facing flat, for example. We don't really get into those details, which affect so much. So, and obviously, so these two areas, do 2 points, cramped spaces and poor ventilation. So and our workspaces also, unfortunately. I mean, it's not just the residential areas, even our workspaces are becoming very, very small. They're shrinking. And as a result, obviously, we are getting into probably a situation where we are seeing an explosion of something called non-communicable diseases. Infectious diseases, yes, one part of it, but then now we're looking at also non-communicable diseases, heart diseases, stroke, that we are the diabetes capital of the world, mental health cases, they are rising on annually actually. And we don't have spaces to walk. We don't have greenery has become almost rare. I mean, they're just patches now, really. There is nothing more to that. So what is all this bringing to us? And walking has, I mean, seriously, nobody takes the stairs. I mean, because we live in now apartment, flat system has meant, they are more of skyscrapers now. So 18 floors, 20 floor, 20th floor, 25th floor. Obviously, everybody will take the elevator. I mean, I have personally seen people taking elevators for like first, second, or third floor, which is really, really astounding. I mean, I don't know what are they thinking. So physical activity has gone down drastically. And of course, it will impact our overall health. So that is the crux of the problem, I feel, but something which we don't really think about too much. And what I mean, when you think about these things, I go and meet doctors often, and I realize that what they say, urban planning, was a term. I mean, and it's a very heavy term, but what does it mean currently? How much of it do we know? How much of it are we acquainted with? I mean, the speaker before me, he talked about sensitization, creating awareness, generating awareness. So, but it's not something that one person can do. It has to be done at a multi-level, in the sense that a lot of stakeholders need to be party to it. It can't just be one department, one ministry. It's different areas, different departments. It has to be a collaborative effort. Otherwise, nobody, a single person, a single entity is not going to make much of a difference. So where do we start? We need to start from generating awareness. So, and also, it's not just the residential or workspaces. We had a wonderful presentation where we saw the hospitals, how they are being built now. Earlier, I mean, they were dingy spaces. I mean, you go to a public health hospital even now. I mean, I have been visiting them and I've seen, though there is a lot of improvement, I must say. But even then, the way our hospitals are designed, I mean, when a patient walks into a hospital, he's already troubled. I mean, some person is suffering from a disease. What do we do? What can we do to make things better for the person? I mean, at least psychologically, if not anything else, I mean, you can't cure the disease by just making the building better. Obviously, that's not possible. But how can we make the person feel comfortable, feel at ease at least? So it has to be a little well lit. There has to be some scope for conversation. I mean, when patients are sitting, it shouldn't look like you have walked into a death den, some sort of a thing. So these are little things which nobody actually thinks about. And I personally feel these are the things that make a lot of difference when you are thinking a lot, when you want to see the difference, real difference being made. So I would say the spaces make a lot of difference in our overall well-being, and the current government is working on it. I mean, I have seen their focus is on holistic health, and when they say holistic health, it's not just the cure they are looking at. Obviously, you disease, you need cure, that will be taken care of, but they're also looking at creating spaces. So we have these health and wellness centers coming up. There is a target of creating at least 1 lakh by next year. So what do these centers do? So they will actually have these experts. So there will be a yoga expert, for example. There will be somebody who will be taking care of your nutrition. There will be an expert who will be talking about, how to make your life better, how to live better. So these are the things that are at the grassroots level. That is what is going to change our health overall scenario completely when we say holistic health, because it's not just the disease. I mean, okay, I am sick, I'll get treatment. But in the long run, what do we want? We want preventive measures. We want things that can impact health, make things our life better. So I mean, buildings or health beyond healthcare, when you say, so it's the preventive part that we actually need to focus on. And a lot of people I have met, they it's not that people don't want to work in these spaces, in these areas. Good ideas, I must say. There are a lot of people who want to really work. We have seen in this conference also, we have seen how brilliant ideas are floating everywhere. But it needs to be communicated well. And that is where we come into the picture. Actually, you said there's a lot of academic work that goes, but how to make it actually accessible to each and every person. The little young people, especially the children. I mean, the most worst affected ones are the children right now, if you see. I mean, their outdoor activities have become bare minimum. They're cooped up most of the time. Pandemic has not helped at all. I mean, it will become worse, I know. So how do we contribute? How do we, I mean, there's a lot of brainstorming that needs to be done on these subjects. I mean, how can we come together? What are the organizations, not just the architects, the healthcare professional, as the person speaker before me rightly said. It's not just the healthcare professionals or not just the architects or not just probably a government division, new urban development ministry. All of us have, it's absolutely imperative that all of us come together and brainstorm, and you make use of the media. Obviously, that's there. I mean, how would effective messaging it's equally important. Just not, there's a lot of good work that's happening, but the effective messaging, communicating with people on ground, the masses, they should know what they should do and what they should not do. As I said, generating awareness is very important. What we are doing right and what we are not doing right. So these little things, I would say, will go a long way in probably changing our overall health, our well-being, in making a positive difference in our lives. That is something which I strongly believe is what is going to work. This is more or less what I had to say on this, but if there are any questions, I will be more than happy to answer.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You have put a lot of light, and very vivid sharing of your experience. And we hope that whatever work we do, you listen to that and make sure all the public gets to know about it, because we've had great speakers, including the previous speaker, including Yugo Lee. All of them spoke about the engineering, the healthcare part, the architecture part. And
Exactly.
what you have said has been very crucial, because you spoke about health beyond healthcare and the role of buildings and public health. And we really thank you so much for taking time out and joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you so much, ma'am.
No problem. You're welcome.
I want to next request Miss Mohana Basu, who's a special correspondent and who writes for Science at the Print. And the title of her address is going to be Science Journalist and the Role They Play in Disseminating Crucial Information Lessons from COVID-19. Mohana ma'am, it's now, stage is yours.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. And, I don't really have a presentation, but really not used to being on this side of things during a webinar. But I do have a lot of things to say about, the role of science journalists. So I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet. To begin with, when we talk about this pandemic, it's something that I like to start from when it began. I remember it was sometime during December 2019 that I had mentioned in a YouTube show called Scientifics, which is a weekly roundup of science stories that we do at the print, that there is a mystery SARS-like virus doing the rounds in China. And little did I know at that time that this mystery virus would dominate the news for the next 2 years and also completely change the way that science news is written and consumed. I have been writing about science for nearly 5 years now, and honestly, my focus in general has been about highlighting, the lesser known scientific works from Indian labs. And like any other journalist, my work relies a lot on people I meet and know, and scientists who are investing time in engaging with the media willingly, right? So I'm a graduate in physics, but I have to write about all kinds of science. So I think I managed fairly well, and that's because science news was never as fast paced as other types of news, which meant I could take my time to learn a new topic and spent time asking a lot of questions to scientists, right? So anytime I had a doubt, I would just call up and just be a student there. So, but the COVID pandemic completely changed things in the sense that, now we were dealing with this invisible virus and people knew nothing about it. So there were a lot of questions that needed to be answered. They needed to be answered immediately, but not enough scientists were willing to engage with the media to answer them. I mean, a lot of those who were speaking were basically, not virologists or not epidemiologists, because let's face it, we don't really give these people the same status that we give to cardiologists, for example. So it was in this environment of lack of information and a lot of fear that we journalists set out to answer questions and spread the information that the public needed. So during the initial stages of the pandemic, in fact, I think it was just say 2 or 3 days into the first lockdown that happened, that I heard that people had stopped their newspaper subscriptions due to the fear of the virus. Again, at that time, very little was known about the virus, and most of what we knew was extrapolation from data from the 2022, the 2002 SARS outbreak and the MERS outbreak. So in any case, whatever the experts told me, that is what I had written. So experts told me that it was possible for the virus to spread through newspapers, but it was very unlikely. So as in it was like the most unlikely scenario among all the things that we knew about that virus and how it spreads. Spreading by the newspaper was the least likely. So we went ahead and published that piece, and then we got a legal notice from one of the biggest media houses in India, and that asked us to basically, take down that piece because it harmed their business. And soon after, a lot of media organizations began to run visuals of spraying disinfectants on their papers before distribution. Now, again, I'm not an expert, but that made no sense except to give like a false reassurance to our readers. And we now know that the virus is least likely to spread through surfaces, but such practice of obsessively disinfecting surfaces just continues. So this episode, right in the beginning of the pandemic, it taught me something very important, and that often do not read beyond the headline or the first few lines in the article. The information, especially when it affects public health, it has to be sent out in a way that the conclusion, the main point, becomes very clear right in the beginning itself. I mean, we are in this era of social media where people consume news on social media. They want it quick, and they do not go ahead and read the entire article, and a lot of what they know is based on just headlines. And it's been almost 2 years now since then, and we are still spraying disinfectants everywhere, even though we now know that the virus is spreading more through aerosols than through surfaces. And not just this, like throughout this pandemic, there have been repeated instances of when dissemination of scientific news has not really been ideal. Like, for example, the whole hydroxychloroquine fiasco, I would call it a fiasco because, it was a low-cost malaria drug. It was easily available. Everyone wanted it to work, but unfortunately, it didn't go. And the problem was that the process of scientific publication is much slower than the news cycle. So what happened was that a small trial showed that the drug showed promise in maybe some 30 people, but and another dishes it killed viral cells. So the headline is not able to include these nuances. So based on very early trials, and there were a lot of clinical trials that started at that time, but people in general and even journalists do not fully understand what exactly happens in the clinical trials, the concept of controls of different setups of things that are included in a trial, and what those things mean in terms of interpreting the results. And in that rush to find a drug quickly, to cure people quickly, even the WHO ended up endorsing a flawed study on hydroxychloroquine. So so as a result, what would happen was, like, even when clinical trials or scientific studies in general began to show that this drug does not work, it did not leave the news cycle because political leaders began to talk about it. India gifted it to other countries, for example. So somebody who does not read or write scientific news ends up thinking that it is a legitimate COVID drug. So when science news begins to overlap political news, it just adds to the confusion, it adds to the misinformation. And this continued with several other things like the convalescent plasma trials, the BCG vaccines, and now there's like a lot of misinformation around ivermectin and whether or not it works on COVID. And all of these were continuously being hotly debated in the news when there was overwhelming evidence out to the fact that they are not actually working. So having science journalists in the newsroom has really not been the priority for media before. In fact, like among science journalists, it's a running joke that if a publication is hiring a science journalist, they must be doing very well for themselves, right? So like we would be the first ones to be the last to be hired and the first to be fired. But in my very short career, I've realized that people are actually very, very interested in science news, and an average Indian reader is actually very smart. And science is so exciting that unless you're an exceptionally bad writer, people will read and understand science news. But this pandemic has taught me that it's that science news is not just and should not be just reduced to pop science articles, so that this reader has something fun to learn after all the heavy political and economic news, right? So in the public health crisis such as the one we are in right now, it becomes very important for newsrooms to be equipped with science writers who can separate facts from misinformation. Someone who can tell the difference between a scientific fact and the attempt of a pharma company or an Ayurvedic company to sell their products in all this confusion. I mean, like if you think about it, all of the panelists have already touched on this topic. It's such a paradox that we live in. We have a lot of information, but the energies get focused in a very different way. Like even this morning when I came to the office, I traveled in the metro. They are still spraying disinfectants on your bags and your hands. When the metro train itself is running on central air conditioning, it's running at full capacity, and there's very little information about what is being done to manage the ventilation in the metro. And same is true for gyms and restaurants. The public ads that invite people back to these spaces talk about the social distancing and the disinfectants, but they don't talk about the ventilation. So that brings me to the next point, which is that science news is not, limited to informing people about science. It's also about informing the experts about things that are being observed on ground. So, for example, there was long COVID. The fact that people who were recovering from COVID were not actually fully recovering, that they had symptoms that continued. So, because the administration was so concerned about stopping the spread of the disease, many of these people who were getting out of hospitals were not getting a chance to do follow-up consultations. And it was the public's reports to the media that actually highlighted the issue. And even when it comes to the vaccine side effects, and that some people have suffered in rare instances, or breakthrough infections, these were things that were highlighted by the media, because this is not something that was getting reported directly to the scientists who were involved in it. So media is very important in terms of facilitating a two-way communication between the experts and the public. Um, I want to conclude by pointing out that it remains very important for researchers and public authorities to engage with the media. So it's not just enough to engage with the public through social media platforms, even though that is important. But it's just that there is a lot of misinformation from some sections of the media, but at the same time, it is the media itself that is working hard towards fighting this misinformation. So, in fact, that is why my Twitter name is also not a scientist. It's a reminder to everyone that even though my work is gathering and disseminating science news, I'm not a scientist myself. And my major responsibility is to ensure that I don't become overconfident in what I write, and I'm constantly educating myself. But I also need to have a continuous dialogue with the public, health experts, and scientists, so that the information that reaches the public is very timely and very accurate during this crisis. So yeah, that's all I have to say, and thank you once again for inviting me. I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your very hearty and vivid sharing. And I want to let you know that your great article that you had done along with Sandhya Ramesh on why it's more important to disinfect the air rather than the surfaces, has helped us. It was part of the PIL that we had put, just to inform you. And you shared.
Yes, I saw that, and I'm very glad that it helped. And in fact, at that time, there was so little science coming on this from India, that most of the sources there were from, the quotes were from international sources. But I'm really glad that it made, its way to the right people.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. And thank you so much, for sharing and for coming and taking time out. And I'm sure you will also, cover the work that Indian academics do, including all the speakers who have spoken today, including Dr. Satish and Dr. Yugo Lee and Dipendraji and P.R. Mehta. And thank you so much for taking time out and sharing your time and sharing your great experience with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So now I would request Professor Dr. Anil Diwan, who's the main, the key behind this whole conference, the key behind this whole seminar. And I request him, before I request him, I would like to introduce Professor Diwan has worked in hospital design, public health for the longest time. He was in the World Bank. He's right now the HOD of architecture, but he's, perpetually for the longest time taught hospital design and public health to students of architecture. He's also, developed hospital standards. He's, contributed to the BIS committees on hospital standards, and even his PhD was on hospital health standards. So I request Professor Dr. Anil Diwan to talk to us about this important, webinar that was held, and please give the vote of thanks to all the people who attended. Sir, up to sir.
Thank you, Raja, for giving me this opportunity. So I would like to thank School of Planning and Architecture, our director, our Dean of Studies, and all the faculty members and students for being here and giving us this opportunity to make this multidisciplinary, intersectorial team effort possible. So now we understand, we know that we cannot work in silos in isolation. We have to work with public health specialists, we have to work with planners, with architects, with engineers to work on natural light and ventilation. These are very basic fundamental concepts which we have somehow lost. So now in our buildings, they say artificially lit and mechanically ventilated. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. And all our speakers, so I could start with Professor E.S.N. Rao and Justice being here. So it's very, very important that we get judiciary coming to us. And so if the chairman of the National Green Tribunal, Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyal was here with us, it made a paradigm shift to the whole discourse, because now everybody listens to us. So I would also like to thank Professor Yugo Lee, bringing in the international Southeast Asia viewpoint, how we can learn from other people's mistakes. China has already made those mistakes. Hong Kong is overcrowded. So how India can leapfrog and not commit those mistakes. So we are doing this TDRs and these land poolings and all those things are coming, and we'll have so tall buildings. So problems and complicating and multiplying them. And I'm very, very grateful to P.R. Mehta sir for giving us the legislative aspects of it, how lawmakers, what the Constitution of India said, and how we as building professionals have to take care of it. Dipendra Prasad is always implementing and practicing what he preaches, which is very, very important for us. And I really thank him for all that. And Advocate K.C. Mittal sir was the backbone of making this possible this time. I'm so grateful to you, sir, and we are ready to work with you till whatever time you say. All our energies are with you. And Dr. Satish sir was great in the NGO sector. So we had the 360-degree perspective to it, when how he could persuade and work as a team with engineers, architects, public health nurses, doctors, and the community together. So unless we bring the community on board, the journey is not complete. And the press, so we had Radhima call from Hindustan Times. She gave the public health and how her interaction with doctors and nutrition and yoga and wellness and health and all that, talking and Ayushman Bharat and all those things which are coming in the pipeline. Very good. And the science writers, the last one to be hired and the first one to be fired, was a great insight which we got. I hope you cover it, ma'am. So Mohana Basu, we are very grateful to you to make it here, and your writings have really made all the difference. And I would thank Raja Singh for doing such good work. Apart, he's not just doing his PhD, but he's bringing it to the community also. How a PhD is not from the library to the library, but it makes a difference to the lives of people. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I really thank all of you for your time today. And I thank Professor Dr. Anil Devan. I thank all the dignitaries who came today. Thank you so much. And all your questions will be emailed to the speakers and we'll get back as an answer. Thank you so much for coming. And it was great having you. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
क्लोज कर दीजिए ना, मीटिंग हो गया। नहीं अपनी जाने दो, तो होस्ट को पूछ ले। बंदी ने कैसे वो तेरे शेयर वाले ने